We know that music helps people deal with stressful situations. We know that it helps them sleep. Dancing is obviously great for your heart. Are you aware of the effect that it has on people?
Well, I am aware of it. I've been constantly told, and I've seen the results of what it can do. For me, it's just part of my life. I've been a musician ever since I can remember. When I could talk, I could sing. I've never identified myself as anything else. It's the way I speak, it's the way I think, it's my form of expression, It's who I am.
Hello and welcome to Join the Docs, our weekly spin around the world of medicine. And this week, a spin around the record deck, if anyone still knows what that is. This week is somewhat different in a couple of ways. First, Dr. Nigel Guest is away on a much-needed holiday, so it's just me and Slim. But to fill the other seat, we have a special guest, a dear old friend and Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, songwriter, singer and guitarist, the incomparable John Oates. We'll talk about his incredible career, his current projects, the toll of fame, his voice, his dedication to a healthy lifestyle, issues with his shoulders, and his charitable works. My words today are peppered with John Oates' song titles, so listen carefully right the way through to the end, as we've got a special giveaway. The first 5 entries with 3 correct titles will win some cool Join the Docs items. Send your entries to info@jointhedocs.com, that's info@jointhedocs.com, or DM us on Instagram and other social media. We can't stop the music, so don your headphones, jeans and leather jacket, turn up the volume, and join the Docs and John Oates. Thanks for being here to Join the Docs, our weekly podcast about the fascinating world of medicine. I'm Professor Jonathan Sackier, and I'm a surgeon. And sitting with me is Slim, our resident skeleton. And you might notice, if you're watching on social media, that he's got a guitar, an air guitar, actually. It's a lot lighter than a Gibson or a Taylor. And he's also got a rather nice head of hair and a moustache and a sling. All that will become clear very shortly. It's all in honor of our guest today, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member John Oates, multi-talented musician, singer, songwriter, and guitarist. Welcome, John. How does it feel to be back in London?
Well, thank you very much. And if I may use a musical intro, a musical-esque intro, Dr. John.
Okay, there you go.
See? Just trying to keep up with you.
Or we could be, wasn't it Dr. John and the Medicine Show? Yeah. Wasn't that another one?
That was another one.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So, John, you're currently... Actually, I should first of all say that we were kind of hoping that you'd bring your guitar and you'd sing for us, but I know that you've been really, really busy doing live shows, and that's tough on your voice. I'd like to come back to that topic a little later.
Sure.
and talk about your voice. But anyone who misses seeing John with his guitar and hearing him sing, go to his website because all his live shows will be on there, and there is tons of recorded music. So you're here to in the UK to do some shows to promote your 6th solo album, a reunion. Tell us how that came about. What was the inspiration? And I recall that one of the songs, it was a different mix, I Found Love.
Yeah.
I think you wrote that just before you got married, if I recall, something like that in the story.
Yep.
And it was previously on 1,000 Miles of Life.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was written in the mid-90s.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us the story tell us about that song and tell us about your
Start with that song?
album. Yeah.
Okay, well, I wrote that song when I met my future wife prior to getting married, and I just felt that this was the right one. It was special. I had been married previously, and I was divorced, and it was it felt right, and so I wrote it. And it was one of those things where sometimes you write a song, but maybe the time and place is just not. It's not the moment to release it. It wasn't until I moved to Nashville and recorded my first album in Nashville in 2007 that I thought this song has found its home. And the reason being is I was embraced and became friends with a lot of the musicians and folks involved in the Americana Music Association, which was just starting in the early 2000s. And it was just a celebration of roots music, authenticity, and it felt very comfortable to me because it brought me back to my early days. Regardless of that, I went into the studio, and I was very fortunate to get three of the most famous bluegrass players in the world. Really, the great Jerry Douglas, who's pretty much acknowledged as the master of the dobro. Sam Bush, a very, very important mandolin player, an incredibly gifted and very adventurous mandolin player, and Bela Fleck, who is without a doubt the greatest banjo player in the world.
Seen Bela Fleck play, amazing.
Amazing. And to get the three of those guys in the room together was not easy because they hadn't been playing together in quite some time. They were all doing their individual things. So to get them together was a historic moment, and for me to be able to play with them, it sort of gave me a kind of a, they kind of patted me on the back, symbolically saying, this guy's okay. He's in, and so that's why I did it. I wanted to include it on this current album 20 years later, more than 20 years later, because the music, I don't think it was really heard on the 1,000 Miles of Life album, because it was a really good record, but it was kind of overlooked. So for any number of reasons. But I wanted to release it again, and I wanted to update it. I wanted to sing it again. I felt I could do a better vocal. I wanted to play it again. But I kept the original Bela Fleck, Jerry Douglas, and Sam Bush parts because I thought they were so important. And the real reason that I put it on the album was because it suited the style of music of this new album.
Right. And the title, where did that come from?
The Reunion?
Just Reunion.
Yeah, well, it was inspired by my 100-year-old father, who a few months ago we thought we were going to lose him. He really took a downturn, and we all gathered at the place where he was living outside of Philadelphia, and it looked like that was it. He was talking about the next step. He was talking about reuniting with Mom, who had passed away years before from dementia, and it really struck me. And it not only did it strike me for the fact that he was acknowledging the fact that he was going to pass away, but it struck me as, for me personally, it seemed like I've been noticing that my horizon's getting closer. And as that word, those ideas, those feelings all came together, and I wanted to express it somehow in a song. And I started thinking about the real, kind of breaking down the word reunion, reuniting, a reuniting of sorts. And I wrote a line called, the lights at the party are bright, but I'm leaving early tonight. And to me, that kind of symbolized what the song could be about it's time to not only move on, but also maybe move away from certain things that are, might have been attractive in the past, might have been, there's a lot of levels of meaning there. And I really wanted to express it correctly. I had a lot of the lyric ideas, but I didn't know what to do with the music. I ran into A.J. Croce, who's the son of Jim Croce.
I lived in San Diego, and Jim Croce's widow had a restaurant bar, and I first saw A.J. Croce play there, and I followed his career. He wrote a song, Which Way Steinway, which was brilliant. He was an amazing performer. I didn't know he was...
He is fantastic. He's an amazing keyboard player, multi-instrumentalist. And, of course, he's got the songwriting DNA, right, from his father. We had never met, but we were thrown together in the same dressing room at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, which is, one of the greatest acoustic venues in the world.
Right.
And it was for a celebration of John Prine's 76th, what would have been his 77th birthday, and he and I just hit it off. It was just like there was
see that
instant chemistry.
Very clever songwriter.
He is, and he's really soulful, and he has a real sense of popular music history. He has an extensive record collection that he inherited from his father. So I just thought, I had never worked with him, but I called him up and I said, hey, I've got this idea, and I think you might be the right person to bring it home. And he was. We wrote it in a few hours. And it's really interesting because he loves the song as well, and he recorded his own version, which is much more of a piano gospel style, whereas mine is much more guitar-oriented. And he's going to be releasing that next year on his album.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
When Nigel is on the podcast and we're together, we love playing musical. Neither of us are musically gifted, but we love using musical analogies for what we do for a living, trying to make people better. And there are many things that you've suggested there that I want to unpick and build on. But anyone listening in who doesn't know the music of Jim Croce, shame on you. He had a voice like an angel and died way too young. And his son, AJ Croce, is an amazing, amazing musician. That's really great. So you started playing guitar as a 5-year-old. And I remember you telling my son, Gabe, about, and his eyes were wide open when you said how often you practiced. Pretty much every day, right?
No one. Let's put it this way: no one ever had to tell me to practice. It was just.
You started playing like as a 5-year-old.
Yeah, my first instrument was an accordion.
Yeah, I
because I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, had a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch, German, kind of heritage, and a lot of people in the area. The only music teacher in town was an accordion player, playing kind of polka, kind of music. And so my mom just signed me up for accordion lessons. And I had no idea why, but I did. And I would go to the lesson and I would fumble my way through whatever it was, this basic, accordion beginner's book. And then I would put the accordion in the closet. And then the next week, I'd pick it up and go back to the lesson. After 2 or 3 lessons, the teacher said, I don't think he wants to play the accordion. And my mom says, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to play the guitar. And that was it. I had, it was all about Chuck Berry, Elvis, the early days of rock and roll, the very beginnings of rock and roll.
Yeah, you were born at the time that was all really beginning to happen, which is amazing.
Well, yes. But interestingly, I was actually born before rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And I remember music before rock and roll, which I think is unique, the fact that I'm that old. My parents were of the world war.
It's not unique that you're that old.
It's unique to, maybe it's unique to the younger generation to actually know that there was music before rock and roll. Most of the younger generation, and a lot of people, I think in general, I've found, think that pop music started with rock and roll. But far be it from the truth. It started... Well, we can go on and on.
Yeah,
I don't think maybe this podcast is not the right forum for a little bit of pop music history.
Music heals the soul, my friend. So no, the hell with it. It's my passion.
You want me to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, just absolutely.
Well, I've done a few albums where I've explored kind of the history, especially of American popular music, and how it evolved. And the thing that I had this revelation about, and I don't know why it should have been a revelation, but it was that the American popular music really is wedded to and joined at the hip with the invention of radio and the invention of the phonograph machine. Because without those two technologies, no one could hear music beyond actually being in front of a live performer or bringing some printed sheet music home and playing it on the piano or whatever. So this was a revolutionary moment, and I think a lot of people just don't think about that, especially with today's technology and and things like that.
John, I know years ago you were on a British music show called The Old Grey Whistle Test, mm-hmm. and the title from that song came from the fact that if you sold a piece of sheet music and people went downstairs and were whistling the tune, you had a hit on your hands.
Oh, that's amazing.
Where the name comes from.
There you go.
I love that kind of
exactly.
Stuff.
Same here.
But anyway, fast forwarding a wee bit, you went to Temple University in the center of Philadelphia, and you met another musician there, mm-hmm. and that led to a collaboration over many years. 21 studio albums, bunch of live albums, many tours, all the way from Philadelphia, all the way around the world.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us, people know about that history, but tell us a couple of things from your perspective about that collaboration.
Daryl Hall and I grew up in small towns in Pennsylvania, about 20 miles apart. We did not know each other as kids. However, we were listening to the exact same radio stations and listening essentially to the same kind of music. In those days, America's music was regional. The sounds of various cities and regions were very distinct. There was no such thing as a national hit mm-hmm. chart of sorts. So you could go to New York, you'd hear certain kinds of music on the radio that were very oriented toward New York performers and New York songwriters. Philadelphia, Memphis, Chicago, The list goes on. California, the list goes on and on. And it wasn't until later that, these big corporate conglomerates, basically bought up all these regional radio stations and combined them together, and it became a national, kind of top 10, as I guess you would call it. So at the time, Philadelphia's music was really unique. So when Daryl and I met, we had this shared musical language that we could draw from. Musical references that we could draw from. And he had a group called the Temptones. I had a group called the Masters. This was basically my high school band. We pooled our money together, went to a recording studio in Philadelphia, recorded a song, got it on the radio in Philadelphia. Daryl independently was doing the exact same thing. Our two songs came out at the same time in the summer of 1967. So I was aware of him, he was aware of me, but we had never met. And then we were both invited to a disc jockey's, what they called a record hop, which was a teenage dance, basically, in a really bad neighborhood in Philadelphia.
There are one or two of those, aren't there?
There was a number of them. And so before we were ready to go on and lip sync our singles, a big gang fight broke out, among the kids. And we basically went into a service elevator, went down to the...
Don't go out into the melee, right?
That's right.
Stay in the elevator.
I like to say that our entire relationship was based on greed and
fear.
And fear.
Well, it's the best motivators out there.
But anyway, so that's how we met. And then we were both going to Temple University. Two of the guys in my group got drafted to Vietnam. Daryl's group was on the verge of breaking up. He asked me if I could play guitar as kind of a backup guitarist, which I did briefly, and that didn't last very long. The group broke up, and he and I gravitated toward each other. But we didn't work together. We would hang out in the same neighborhoods. We shared some apartments. He was doing studio work. I was playing in blues bands and folk clubs. And eventually, then, we finally made it a little more official.
Tell us one memory, because it was many, many years, but one sensation that you got or one thing that you experienced as a result of the success that you achieved during that period.
We were not a successful act, We had to do it the hard way, the way that artists found themselves in those days. You had to work, you had to play live, you had to develop your ability, your skill as a singer, a songwriter, a instrumentalist, and you had to try to get a record contract. That was the ultimate goal was the record contract. That was that was it. And they were not easy to get because record companies were not just signing everyone who just... Well, because you couldn't post music, you couldn't just create music on a laptop. There was a whole different paradigm of how to become successful. We worked at it. We played folk clubs, we played art galleries. Eventually, we played a telethon, for a medical charity telethon in Philadelphia. And that changed everything because television is very powerful. So all of a sudden, here we went from relative obscurities, these two hippies in Philadelphia, and then people started recognizing us on the street. And that led eventually to a record contract, which there was a lot more to that story, of course. And it took a number of years before that happened. And of course, we made 4 albums before we had success, commercial success on the radio. We did have what was known as a turntable hit, which meant it was played a lot, but it didn't climb the charts.
Which
She's Gone.
She's Gone, yeah.
On an album called Abandoned Luncheonette, which we released in 74.
I heard a story that the cover photo was an old luncheonette.
Right. It was an old diner near...
An old diner.
And Daryl actually used to go there as a kid.
Yeah. And I heard...
It was abandoned. It was... Trees were growing up through it and,
It was a great piece of cover art.
Yeah.
It really was.
The actual cover art was done by my girlfriend, who was a student at Moore College of Art in Philadelphia. She was a photographer and a graphic artist.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that. So moving on a little bit, you've done and continue to do a show called The Stories Behind the Songs, where you explain to the audience how songs get written, yours and other people, the songs that we listen to in our car, in our portable radio, anywhere and everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I love those stories, and I always think about other artists. And I've actually heard the guys from 10cc talk about how a song got constructed. I'm Not in Love is of course, the classic. Tell us one of your favorites.
Well, I'll tell you about She's Gone then, since we just mentioned it. I was out and about in New York City at 3 o'clock in the morning on a frigid December night. And believe it or not, in those days in New York City, there really weren't any, if at all-night restaurants. And there was one on Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village called the Pink Teacup. And it was a soul food restaurant. And I found myself in there, and the door flies open, and in comes this gal. She had no coat. She had a pink tutu and cowboy boots. And like I like to say, and it's sort of a euphemism, but we began dating almost immediately. Let's put it that way. In the
Ever the gentleman.
In the 70s, you know, that sort of thing.
We get the euphemism.
Sort of happened. And I thought things were going pretty well. And New Year's Eve was coming up. And I said, hey, let's hang out. And she said, oh, that sounds great. So I gave her my address. New Year's Eve came and went. I was sitting on the couch with a guitar. She never showed up. And best thing that ever happened to me, because I sat and I went, well, if she's not coming tonight, she's not coming at all. And I thought, oh, she's gone. The songwriting antenna goes up, and that's just one of the many, many, little anecdotal things.
But it's interesting because I can't believe there's anyone out there who doesn't know the song, but it's brilliant, and the lyric is brilliant. It's very plaintive. It reads like, it sounds like the story of a man who's brokenhearted because the love of his life has left, and it's pink tutu and cowboy boots.
Well, Daryl had gotten a divorce or a little bit prior to that. And when I played him the chorus idea that I had, he immediately picked up on it. And we wrote that song literally in about an hour. And we just looked around the apartment. And there's one line, there's many lines. I think, and I appreciate you saying that it is brilliant, because I think it's the greatest thing we've ever written together. There's a line called "Worn as a toothbrush hanging in the stand." It's such an everyday image. It's such a normal image. But if you think about it, there's a symbolism in that, and a symbolic power to this simplicity of that image. Yeah. And when you can do that, I think it resonates with people. And I think that's what the magic of being a songwriter is. You're creating something from nothing. And hopefully you're doing something where people can kind of think, even if they don't think consciously, they can say, that's exactly how I feel. If I could write a poem, or if I could write a song, I would have done that.
And that's why,
the magic.
The talent that you and fellow musicians have is so fascinating to me. I've dedicated my life to healing using a different set of skills and talents, I guess. Recently, I went to see a show in London called Just for One Day, and if anyone can catch it, highly recommend it. It's the story about how Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, Bob Geldof from Boomtown Rats and Midge Ure from Ultravox, put together some activities in response to the terrible, terrible famine in Ethiopia in the 80s. And it started with Band Aid, an iconic supergroup. They recorded on this side of the pond and on your side of the duck pond, a couple of songs which raised money. The one in America was We Are the World, serious music for the purposes that I've stated. Tell us about that experience of, people like me wonder, how the hell do all those people from different places, different styles of music, they may or may not, I think everyone on the outside thinks that everyone who is a professional musician there, everyone knows everyone, and everyone hangs out together. When, of course, that's not the case at all. But tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, just to follow up on what you said, you're 100% right. People don't realize that artists in general, music artists in general, they're the sun of their own solar system. And the planets and moons.
Some more than others.
Yeah, well, some suns are larger than others.
Yes,
let's put it
there
that
you
way.
go.
But the planets and the moons that are surrounding them are the managers and the musicians and the band and the agents and the hangers-on and whatever. Those solar systems very seldom come in contact with each other, because and just the nature of being a musical artist, being a performer, it's a very narcissistic, endeavor. You have to focus on yourself. It has to be all about yourself, because that's the demands by the public, the self demands by the industry, and so.
And you're traveling the whole time.
You're traveling constantly, exactly.
Working, again, for people who don't know, you work bloody hard. I mean, I know what it's like when, early morning radio appearances and what do you call it, grip and grins, where you've got to shake people's hands and smile at them.
Right. Well, but the reason that We Are the World was able to happen was because in those days there wasn't a glut of award shows like there is today. It seems to be a music award show every week. Mm-hmm. There was the Grammys and there was the American Music Awards in the U.S. And anyone who was anyone in the music business was going to be attending those events. Well, it just so happened that it was the American Music Awards in Los Angeles. When Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson wrote the song, they knew that everyone who was anyone was going to be in one place. So all of a sudden it was pretty easy to send out invitations to various artists and say, this is what we're doing. Come over to the studio at the end of the award ceremony. It was a fleet of limos, literally. And everyone just piled in and went to the studio, which was very close, by the way. It was only a few blocks away. And no managers or agents were allowed in the room. They had to stay out, which was a very smart idea, because it actually broke down the barriers and let people let their hair down. And the various artists who seldom came in contact with each other could actually talk, intermingle, just hang out, basically. And they did create a very kind of casual environment to let that happen. So it was very well engineered in that regard. And it was fantastic. I was standing, I had Bob Dylan was right behind me, and Ray Charles was right in front of me. And I thought, this is pretty cool, So I actually had I was aware enough to go around with the musical lead sheet that they had provided to everyone with the lyrics and the music, and I got everyone to sign it. So I have probably one of the only copies in existence of that.
Wow. Wow. Lionel Richie came to a charity dinner that I was involved with years ago. What a sweet guy, an amazing voice, but a lovely, lovely human being. Following on, you played at Live Aid in front of a live audience of 89,000 people and a TV audience of 1.5 billion, not to gild the lily. What's your best memories of shows you've played, live shows? I mean, that was like a once-in-a-lifetime kind of experience. But you've played big auditoriums and very intimate clubs. Tell us what turns you on.
Well, the Live Aid experience was unbelievable, because it up to that time, it was the biggest music show in history. No one had ever simulcast a show around the world. So it was a historic event. The fact that Daryl and I were incredibly popular commercially, on having tons of hit records and all that, and it was in Philadelphia. We managed to get the closing slot. We were the closing act, and we wanted to make it something special. So we recruited Eddie Kendrick and David Ruffin, who were the original lead singers from the Temptations, who are our childhood heroes. And Mick Jagger had done a solo album at that time, and he didn't have a band, and he asked us if we would back him. So we rehearsed with Mick Jagger, which was amazing, by the way, and that's a whole story unto itself. And we actually didn't know that Tina Turner was going to be involved. And that was the kind of famous moment where he kind of pulls her skirt off, and all that. Yeah. So we really did we were headlining Live Aid in Philadelphia, and it was absolutely incredible. And getting a chance to hang out in the backstage area with, Jack Nicholson was there and all the other bands. And there's a very famous picture of us, Daryl and I, with a couple of the Stones and Madonna and Dylan. And it was was, I think it was on the cover of Life magazine, actually.
What a wonderful, wonderful experience. And for the benefit of people listening in who've never looked at this footage, it's out there. You just go to YouTube and punch it in and you can watch it. It's astonishing to see all these incredible people raising a huge amount of money. And what Bob Geldof did was, he is on my list of people I'd love to sit down and have a beer with. He seems like
I have a feeling he'd probably like to talk to you.
Yeah, he's a real good human being. So, John, I want you to picture the scene. There are two doctors sitting in a conference.
Is this a joke?
Well, sort of. We do occasionally sit in conferences, and the room is packed, and one doctor leans over and says to the other doctor, "How many truly brilliant doctors do you think there are in this room?" And the other guy says, "One less than you think are here." So fame has its toll. It has its upsides, for sure. You can do things that other people, very few people have sat backstage with, the sort of people that you've been mentioning. But it also has downsides. Lack of privacy, constantly being surveyed, chased by photographers, people making all sorts of suggestions and accusations. Social media can be brutal. I remember seeing Sean Connery interviewed on a British talk show, and I think it was Michael Parkinson said to him, does it bug you? Does it wear you down? And he says, "My dear chap, it'll bother me when they don't ask for my autograph."
Yeah.
But you've always, when I've been with you in public spaces, you always deal with things very graciously, but it does have an effect, right? How have you dealt with it mentally?
I first of all, I like people. And I think I carry myself in a way that I'm able to just be, blend in a sort. I'm short. I don't really stand out when I'm in a crowd. And I've picked places to live where no one cares whether you're famous or not, i.e. New York City and Aspen, Colorado, and Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Real quick aside about Nashville. There's a TV show, a reality TV series called TMZ that comes around and basically haunts and chases and
celebrities.
Yeah, celebrities, right? And most celebrities, they put their hoodie up and they run away, try to punch the camera, right? Well, they came to Nashville, and they left very quickly because as soon as they stalked a country singer, the country singer would come out and start promoting their new album, and no one ran away from them. So it was kind of interesting. But anyway, so I don't know. I try to treat people, nicely, and unless they're, a pain in the ass, and then I move on.
But it's never bugged you. You've never.
It did in the 80s when we were super popular, when we were on top of the pop world. It was crazy. And there was no privacy. There was no, everything was jacked up and hyper speed. It was, but all I did was work. I mean, a lot of people might not know it, but from the time Daryl and I signed a record contract in 1972, we made an album, wrote songs, and toured. Wrote songs, made an album, and toured in that exact order from 1972 until 1986 without ever stopping, not one time. And sometimes we made multiple albums in one year, like a live album or a compilation or something like that. So you're talking about, a good, 15 years of straight work with and I had no personal life at all. My personal life was just wedged in between,
Well, I guess that's where I was going with this, because, there have been a number of high-profile deaths, of course, in your profession, and a lot of it is to do with the toll. And you and I were talking before that the number one profession or job that kids want to have today is they want to be famous without actually doing anything to merit that, without having a purpose, an ikigai, right? Actually, with Japanese and Oriental culture takes me on to my next one. Your first solo album was the cleverly titled Feng Shui. Very clever play on words. And you've done other, as I said, this is your sixth one, and other solo projects. Being the mustachioed part of a very popular duo, was going solo, did it induce any trepidation or?
No, not really. Daryl and I always tried to, describe and think of ourselves as two individuals. We never really wanted to be joined at the hip, even though we were.
That's why it was always not Hall and Oates.
It was always Daryl. If you look at all
John
the
Oates.
albums, it says Daryl Hall and John Oates. We made a point of that, even though it seems insignificant probably to the average person. Daryl made solo albums as early as the mid-'70s. So I just was never ready to do it. I didn't have anything to say musically. And plus, every waking moment that I had free, I wanted to do something else. I raced cars. I learned to fly. I just wanted to, I went exploring around the world. I lived in the mountains and became a skier. So I wanted to do other things.
Let's explore that. Because you said, I learned to fly. It was just like a throwaway line. I learned to fly. I raced cars. You got a license to fly and to drive cars and ski and all these. So you're a very driven guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am.
And does that come through? Again, for people who are not familiar with the music, if they look at who's involved in your solo albums, it's a who's who, really, of...
well, I've been very fortunate and blessed to be able to attract great musicians and great partners when it comes to that. And I think it has to do with the fact that when you're a songwriter who writes good songs, good players and like to play good songs. Daryl and I were never a jam band or an instrumental kind of a jazz fusion prog rock, with kind of esoteric. We were very tight and very, songs that were really coherent in a way. And I think we've always attracted great players, whether it's Hall and Oates or whether it's my solo work. And so that's, I think it just comes with the territory. I just think it's attractive to good players.
Yeah. So when we first met, I remember telling you that I listened to your music when I cut people's bellies open. I remember seeing the look of shock and horror on your face. Then I explained I'm a surgeon and I have a...
you had to explain that part, right?
Well, I just like causing a little bit. It's good to have a little bit of frisson. And I told you that one of the songs I'd heard which introduced me to Americana music was Deep River Blues that you play, which I still love that song. And you had the album Arkansas.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about what attracted you in your discovery of Americana music.
Well, in the early 60s, I had a very good friend, a kid who I was in school with, whose older brother went off to college in the South. And when he came back from school on the holiday, Christmas holiday, he brought back all these albums of folk performers, roots performers, whether they be bluegrass, Appalachian, Delta blues. And I had never heard music like that before. I was, of course, listening to rock and roll on the radio. And college kids were rediscovering, there was a folk revival that was happening, sweeping across America. And all these, a lot of these very authentic players and artists were being rediscovered. A guy like Mississippi John Hurt. He was recording on OK Records in the late 20s and the early 30s, and then he was working on a cattle farm from 1933 until 1960. And then he was rediscovered, and he was brought up to the northern campuses, played at colleges, played coffee houses, played at places like the Newport Folk Festival, and Philadelphia. Philadelphia started a folk festival shortly after Newport, so it's over 60 years old and still running. And I'm headlining it this summer in August, which is a full circle moment for me because as a kid...
That's going to be on your website, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I sat there on the grass with a stage about yay high in front of these incredible players, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, Mississippi John Hurt, Doc Watson, people like that, who you've mentioned for Deep River Blues. And I watched them, and I got to see them not only at the festival, but in the local coffee houses and things like that. So it was a really important moment for me because I learned the origins of rock and roll, of how it evolved and developed. And that's what the Arkansas album was really all about. So Doc Watson has always been a hero of mine. And he's still, to this day, among the incredible musicians that are out there, one of the greatest acoustic guitar players of all time. So maybe tonight I'll play that for you if you like.
That would be amazing.
I'll try.
So you moved to Colorado a few years back, and I remember you telling me the stories about your rather famous neighbor, Hunter Thompson, the very famous journalist, author, who I believe had a rather quirky personality.
Oh, yeah.
And he lived just over the road from you pretty much. And there was something about his car.
My future wife, and we were just dating at the time, Amy, she found a piece of property in a little area called Woody Creek, which is outside of Aspen, Colorado. And it had been abandoned. There was a house that had burned down years ago. All there was a little cabin and a horse barn. And when we were looking at the property to potentially buy, in the little cabin, which was really like a garage, was the red convertible. The Fear and Loathing was known as the Land Shark. If you know anything about Hunter Thompson, he had this red convertible that he used during when he wrote the book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Great book.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And so there it was, sitting in this little cabin garage thing, and right across the street is where he lived. And so I said to the real estate agent, whose car is this, and why is it here? And he said, well, that belongs
in the piece of property that you just bought.
Property, right? That we were about to buy it. Yeah. And he said, well, that's Hunter's. It's from across the street. So I said, well, why is this car here? He goes, well, this is Woody Creek. You can do anything you want as long as you don't get caught. And he just put the car in there, put a padlock on the door, and that was it. So we were going to convert this little cabin into an apartment while we built our house. And obviously the car had to go at some point. And I would go up and knock on the door, and he would never answer. And I did it 2 or 3 times, and I said, well, screw it. I'll just jump start it. The keys were in it. I backed it out, drove it up to his property. I pulled it directly up to his door and left it there. And I knew him for 20 years, and he never said a word to me about it. I think he just thought the car appeared, someday,
I love
in a psychedelic haze of some
psychedelic haze.
Right.
There's a great story about his funeral, which is well worth reading online.
Yeah. I was there, by the way.
You were?
Not only was I there, I played at it.
You did?
I played with Lyle Lovett and Johnny Depp and a few of the other guys in my Colorado band.
Right. Oh, amazing. That he was quite a character. And again, I love to make recommendations to the people who listen in. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. You ain't read it? Read it. Read up about Hunter Thompson. A bunch of years ago, you and I did a fireside chat in Chicago at a health conference and talked about staying healthy. And I introduced you as a survivor of one of the most dangerous professions on the planet because of the loss of life of people in the music business. But being fit has always mattered to you, being healthy, both physically and mentally. I know you wrestled at high school. Rock and roll can carry a price, as I've suggested. And you've already mentioned going to Aspen and changing your life for a chicken coop and a donkey named Jasper. And a gorgeous wife and a great son. So you've stayed healthy, and you made a comment to me the other day about incorporating it into everything you do. So when you walk, when you lift something, tell us a little bit about your philosophy. You've already mentioned skiing and racing and so on and so forth.
Well, I was, as you said, I was a wrestler. I was an athlete as a kid. And I always thought I was fairly fit until I went to Colorado at the high altitude, and I started hanging out with the natives who were skiing, 100 days a year. And I realized that the reason they could do that was not because they just did a few squats and sit-ups a week or two before they went skiing. It was a year-round discipline. They were cycling and hiking in the summer. They were working on farms. They were it was basically a lifestyle. And I suddenly, that was a revelation for me. And when I moved out there, I got very, very fit because I was basically doing the same thing. And I dropped out of music in the early 90s pretty much and did that, lived in the mountains. And so it's really, it's become it's what I learned, that kind of discipline I've carried over, even though I'm not living in Colorado full time anymore and not doing that sort of thing. I carry it over to my everyday life. When I walk all the time. There's never a day that goes by where I don't walk. I've also had to modulate the frequency and the intensity of workouts and things because I'm older, and I realize that you just can't keep doing the same things at the same level. During the pandemic, when I was really bored, I began doing yoga. And I always kind of scoffed at the yoga thing, you know, with all the accoutrements and the rolls and the, you know, I was like, but I just.
It's bloody hard.
Well, you know, it can be. For me, I just opened up my iPad and found somebody demonstrating yoga, and I just followed along and kind of taught myself. I've never been to a yoga class in my life, but I do it every day, literally every morning. And what I've learned is, you know, I've learned how to stretch for the type of stretches that my body needs. Right. And that changes, of course. And so I've done various things, chiropractic and, you know, all sorts of various modalities. I just did cupping for the first time because my neck has been stiff, and it actually I think it worked.
Yeah.
I can't tell. It looks cool.
You're talking to an allopathic doctor here. There's some of that stuff. We can explore it. Well, you know. I always say, listen, if it ain't harmful and it works for you, have at it and go for it.
Exactly.
But your comments about making it part of your life, we know from the Blue Zone studies that meaningful exercise, not going to the gym, but meaningful exercise, walking everywhere, right? Or, you know, working on a farm or going hiking and being in nature. Meaningful exercise contributes to good health, and it also contributes to good mental health. Yeah. I want to dig a little bit into the music stuff. My guitar teacher told me, I think I've told you this one, that it would be a service to humanity if I stopped playing. People like you, musicians, are able to see the world through a different optic, and as such provide substrate for people like me, and use music as a healing element. Right? We know that music helps people deal with stressful situations. We know that it helps them sleep. We know that dancing is obviously great for your heart. Tell us a little bit about your views on music as a healing aid for you as well as a songwriter, how you can put your thoughts down on paper. And are you aware of the effect that it has on people? You must be.
Well, I am aware of it because, you know, I've been constantly, you know, told, and, you know, I've seen the results of what it can do. For me, it's just part of my life. I've been a musician ever since I can remember, and I could talk, and when I could talk, I could sing. So, you know, I've never identified myself as anything else. So for me, it's who I am. So it's hard for me to even separate myself from anything like that. So I don't know. It's just it's the way I speak. It's the way I think. It's the way I. It's my best. You know, it's my form of expression. You know, everyone has a.
Well, take it as a given from me. It helps. So last time I was in New York, I saw an artist who I've always enjoyed, Southside Johnny, and he was performing without his Asbury Dukes. And he was doing the music of Billie Holiday. And he started out by saying, and I'm going to paraphrase out of respect to him, but he basically said, I've lived hard, shall we say, and my voice ain't up to doing what I used to do, so what's left? Billie Holiday. So tell me about the disciplines you go through to protect your voice, because it's germane to anyone out there listening in for the health of their vocal cords and their larynx.
Yeah, well, since I've been performing solo for the last few years a lot, I've really had to be very, very careful on how much I use my voice. First of all, I know how to sing. I took singing vocal lessons, so I know how to breathe properly. I know the difference between my head voice and my throat voice. There's an actual physical, you know, and you have to remember, singing is it's a muscle essentially, and you know, muscles get worn out. You know, they can get overused, worn out. So you have to protect it in that, you know, in terms of how much you use it, how hard you use it. So I have various ways of singing to get through a song. Sometimes, and I'll use it just this week as an example. I was playing Royal Albert Hall, and I really wanted to make a statement, and I really wanted to hit it hard, and I sang really hard. I went for everything. The highest of highs, the lowest of lows, the loudest of louds. And it took a toll on my voice. But in the back of my mind, I also knew I had 2 more shows back to back. For me, I've learned that 3 shows in a row is pretty much my limit. and I have to really be careful. So last night I did a show, and the sound wasn't very good. I couldn't hear myself very well. So I immediately had to modulate what I was doing and adjust what I was doing to get through, because I know tonight I have to do it again, and I had to talk to you all day. So right now I'm talking in my head voice,
right?
Because the air is passing my vocal cords. It's not even vibrating them, and I know how to do that. It's, if you go to a speech pathologist or a therapist, they can teach you how to do that. So anyway, I've just learned how to do it. It's and it has to do with moisture. Having a humidifier. I carry a little miniature humidifier with me for hotel rooms. I gargle with salt. That really helps me. Salt, gargling with warm water and salt is like a magic potion.
But a very good message for people listening in is, if you do detect a change in your voice, get it checked out, because it can imply a problem either with the vocal cords themselves, with a simple inflammation, a nodule, or something more serious, or a problem with the nerves, the recurrent laryngeal nerve that supplies the throat. And sometimes a problem within the thyroid gland, for instance, can present with a change in your voice. So any change in your voice, see your doctor. You mentioned wearing out muscles. So the shoulder's a very complex joint.
Yes.
There's 4 muscles that cross the shoulder. And then there's a rim of cartilage around, where anyone looking on social, zoom in and have a close look at Slim's shoulder, and you'll see how the top of the humerus plugs into the scapula, the shoulder bone. And if you fall awkwardly, you can actually tear one of the muscles, or more commonly the tendon, or where the muscle meets the tendon. You can damage the cartilage, and that causes terrible, terrible pain and an inability to raise your shoulder, your arm beyond a specific place. I did mine playing tennis. It also happens with age, and there's a number of other conditions where it can happen. It's called a rotator cuff tear, or tendonitis, inflammation of the tendons. All sorts of ways of treating it. And I happen to know that, actually, if you look at Slim, our skeleton, you'll see that he's got his arm is being held up, as that's the only way you can play the guitar. Tell us about your experiences with your shoulders.
I've had 2 rotator cuff operations, both shoulders. The first one happened skiing. I was skiing in the trees, and my pole got caught on a tree.
When you say you were skiing in the trees,
well,
in between the trees.
In between the trees, yes. Well, that's the goal.
Yes, not hitting them.
And I didn't hit a tree. However, going in between 2 very narrow, like a little narrow spot in the trees, my pole got caught on a branch and got pulled back like this. Of course, my body kept going.
Yeah, and that's a traumatic rupture.
Yeah, it was very bad, and that was the first one. So, me kind of wanting to ignore the fact that this might have happened, I put some tiger balm on it, and
that'll help.
Yeah, and tried to pretend that it wasn't that bad, until it got to the point where I literally could not lift my arm above my shoulder. Yeah. And I saw multiple doctors who kept saying, "Hey, it's not if you're going to get an operation, it's when. Set aside some time." And I said, "How much time?" They said, 6 months to a year. And I went, I don't have that kind of time. So I kept avoiding it. I finally couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I'd roll over, I'd wake up. It was just, I was completely, not, I knew it was. And I went to the Stedman Clinic in Vail, very good, great orthopedic people. It was without a doubt the worst experience I've had, because it was the most painful thing I've ever done. And they say shoulder pain is one of the most painful things you can experience. As you said, the shoulder, it's the only joint that moves in all directions, right? Everyone told me, because other people had it, they said, whatever you do, make sure you do the physical therapy. And that's like medieval torture. But they said it is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, it is.
And luckily, living in Colorado, there's great doctors, great physical therapists, and I did it every day. I'll tell you a really, really crazy story. I don't take any drugs, right? So after the operation, they gave me a prescription for Oxycodone or Oxycontin or whatever it was. And so I didn't actually even know what it was. but I knew it was for pain. So the first night home, it was just so painful. I said, oh, well, I got to take this. So I took it, and, didn't help very much, but it was a little bit better. So the next day, you go immediately into physical therapy. They don't even waste a day. It's right away, right? So I got up in the morning and I said, well, I've got to drive down Valley about 15 miles for my physical therapist. So I'll take one of these Oxycontins because
oh dear,
I want to make sure I can, I'm not in too much pain when I get there.
Did you read what it says on the bottle?
Of course not.
Of course not.
So I took one, and I'm driving, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm getting there. Finally get down to the physical therapy place, and I go in, and I said, man, I don't know. I said, he goes, well, what's going on? I said, well, I took the pain pill before I came. He said, what was it? And I told him. He said, oh no, you can't do that. And I said, I'm not going to do it anymore. He said, I'll take them. So, anyway, it's kind of funny.
I think he probably meant for someone else.
Yeah, I'm sure
well,
he
maybe.
did. I'm sure he did.
Or maybe not. But so anyone out there, pain in your shoulder, see your doctor.
Yeah.
Many of them actually do recover if it's not a complete tear with physical therapy.
Yeah.
Walking your hand up the wall and using a
All that
TheraBand,
stuff.
these stretchy bands.
I have full flexibility and mobility and range of motion, which was the goal. Yeah. But what I can't do, I really can't lift anything.
Yeah.
And I certainly can't lift over my head. Yeah. And I don't, like, for instance, if I'm carrying a guitar or a piece of luggage, I keep my arm straight and I bend down and I pick it up like this. Yeah. I don't do this. Plus, I tore my bicep tendon as well. And that was never repaired.
When did you do
Same
that?
time.
Same time?
Yeah.
And they didn't repair that?
Well, no, because they said that's going to be another 4 months.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm not doing it.
Well, it's probably not a complete tear, but it's probably inflamed. And,
yeah.
That sucks.
It
Serves
did
you
suck.
right for skiing.
and basically, as I started to recover, and I had the big sling, it's kind of a reinforced type sling. The only guitar I could play was a thin line electric guitar, which I could slide under my armpit.
So you couldn't play an acoustic.
Well, I couldn't strum.
Yeah.
I couldn't do this.
Yeah.
But I could finger pick.
Yeah.
So I would slide the guitar under my arm, and I would just do this.
just like our skeleton over
exactly.
Same,
look at that. Yeah.
Same sort of deal. So we've talked about your work with Band Aid and Live Aid. You also helped with an event that I was involved with after 9/11 that we did in the Chesapeake. And you and your lovely wife, Amy, did an event for Feeding America during the pandemic, which was marvelous. And recently, you had a song called Get Your Smile On with a really lovely video for teen cancer.
Right.
Talk to us about how that happened and, your feelings about musicians like you doing your bit.
Well, as a result of getting off the hamster wheel of touring during the pandemic, I really started to think about about giving back even a little bit more. I've always felt it was important to do, but I thought at this time in my life and stage of my career, the success I've had, it's really important to do that. And so that's when Amy and I did the Feeding America program. And so I started thinking about it, and I was made aware of Roger Daltrey's foundation charity called Teen Cancer America, and I knew it was very music-centric. I had met a few folks who were involved in it, and I thought it was really great. And because a lot of the teenage cancer survivors they want to be songwriters, they're musicians, they want to record, whatever. So they really have a great, robust program there. And I thought it was great. I got involved. They asked me to contribute something musically. And I had a song that I actually wrote and recorded on my laptop, which is something I had never really done before. But here again, during the pandemic, I wasn't going to recording studios. And I had it just sitting in the digital archive somewhere, and I thought, you know what, the theme of that seems to resonate. So I submitted it. They loved it, and we decided to do a video, and we had some of the survivors be part of the video, which was really nice. And I've gotten to meet them. Just did a show in L.A. with Roger Daltrey and a few other artists to raise money for the event. So yeah.
Well, good on you. John, since we've met, since I've known you, you always have a very calm demeanor, and I think it comes across in our conversation today. You're always smiling. You're always nice to people. You said you like people. You're always a very, very pleasant person. How you live and how you treat people, you're calmer, if you will. Do you have some recommendations for listeners and those watching on social media about life and how not to get out of touch, to lose grip, to have a purpose? Like it or not, people like you who've achieved something, everyone achieves something in their life, but you've achieved it in a public forum. Do you have advice for people based on your life experiences?
I don't know. I'm not very good. I'm definitely not a guru. All I know is what works for me. I think you have to find your passion. You have to follow your passion, and if you can find it, the old cliche is that everyone has to work at some point in their life. If your passion and your work is what you love, then you're going to be successful. I mean, that's essentially the secret to a successful life, I believe. Find something that you want to look forward to every day and do it. Not many people get that opportunity, but if you can do it, that's probably I think that's my philosophy. My other mantra and philosophy is, which I follow, is when you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're still in the fucking tunnel.
Absolutely right. The other version is probably a train. That's a very negative thing. But what you mention is, I mentioned it before, ikigai, a sense of purpose, because it drives us. Sadly, we've come to the end of our time together at Join the Docs. I want to thank you for being with us here today, John. For each element of our lives, you've given us a melody from memory, if you will, whether something joyous or reflective. So thank you for the music, Mr. Oates, and keep bringing it. In the show notes, we're going to have links to your autobiography, Change of Season, which has got some great stories in it, upcoming shows, all your albums, your website, all the stuff you're doing where you can be seen. If you've enjoyed Join the Docs, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, like us on social media, write a review, tell your friends, and also check out our social media. You can visit the website at jointhedocs.com. All sorts of additional material there, and you can also get great merchandise featuring the work of our resident goofy artist, Robin Gott. And going back to social media, you can write to us there to suggest a topic or ask us to cover something or make any comments that you like. And if you want to make a nasty comment, well, please don't. It upsets us. So with that, it's bye from me.
Thanks, John. I appreciate you having me. It's always fun to talk to you.
Absolutely. All the best.
All right.
So until next time, everyone, please stay happy, stay healthy. Beats the alternative. We're going to spend a long time dead. Bye for now.